Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment when life taps you on the shoulder, not to comfort you, but to correct you. A moment when God whispers, "You're giving too much access to people who haven't earned your trust." We've been taught that kindness means availability, that love means saying yes, that being friendly keeps the peace. But hear this clearly: being kind is godly, being too friendly is costly. Some of you have been smiling through disrespect, explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, and shrinking your boundaries just to keep a seat at tables God never assigned you to. You've been open where you should have been discerning, generous where you should have been guarded, and all the while, your spirit has been getting tired, your purpose delayed, and your peace negotiated away. Faith doesn't mean foolishness. Grace doesn't mean permission. Even Jesus loved everyone, but he didn't trust everyone. He healed crowds, yet he walked away to pray alone. He served faithfully, but he didn't chase approval. There's a difference between having a good heart and giving everyone unrestricted access to it. As we step into 2026, God isn't calling you to harden your heart. He's calling you to strengthen it, to understand that boundaries are not walls of fear, but doors of wisdom. That you can be respectful without being reachable, loving without being loose, friendly without being vulnerable. To everyone who shows up, some connections are assignments, others are distractions, and maturity is knowing the difference. This season is about alignment, aligning your energy with your calling, your time with your purpose, and your relationships with the future God has already prepared for you. When you stop being too friendly, you make room to be fully effective, fully focused, and fully obedient to who you're called to become. Keenness without boundaries is self-betrayal, and many people don't realize it until they're exhausted, resentful, and spiritually drained. At its core, kindness is meant to reflect love, compassion, and generosity, but when it operates without limits, it quietly turns into a form of neglect toward oneself. You begin giving what you were never meant to surrender: your time, your peace, your emotional safety, under the assumption that being good means being endlessly available. Over time, that misunderstanding becomes a burden you carry daily, smiling on the outside while breaking down internally. Too often, people confuse being Christ-like with being constantly accessible. They believe that love requires endless patience, unlimited tolerance, and silent endurance of disrespect. But true kindness is intentional, not impulsive. It has wisdom attached to it. When kindness lacks boundaries, it stops being an expression of strength and becomes a response rooted in fear, the fear of rejection, conflict, or being misunderstood. You say yes when your spirit is screaming no, not because it's right, but because you're afraid of how people will react if you finally choose yourself. This is where self-betrayal begins. Each time you ignore your inner warning to keep the peace, you teach people how to treat you. Each time you overextend yourself to feel needed, you reinforce the lie that your value is tied to what you can give. Slowly, your identity shifts from who you are to what you provide. You become the reliable one, the understanding one, the one who always adjusts, until one day you realize no one is adjusting for you. God never designed kindness to come at the expense of your calling. There is a divine order to generosity, and it includes stewardship. Just as you wouldn't give away your entire harvest and leave yourself with nothing to plant, you are not meant to give everyone unrestricted access to your heart, your time, or your emotional labor. When you do, you're not being noble, you're being careless with what God entrusted to you. Boundaries are not a lack of love. They are proof that you understand the value of what you carry. Self-betrayal often hides behind good intentions. You tolerate behaviors that drain you because You don't want to appear unkind. You remain loyal to relationships that stunt your growth because you've invested too much to walk away. You minimize your own needs because you've convinced yourself that sacrifice is always holy. But sacrifice without discernment is not obedience, it's imbalance. Even Scripture teaches seasons of giving and seasons of withdrawing, moments of engagement and moments of separation. When kindness is guided by wisdom, it becomes powerful. You learn that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's necessary. You understand that saying, no does not make you difficult, it makes you honest. You stop apologizing for boundaries that preserve your mental and spiritual health. You begin to recognize that not everyone deserves the same level of access, and that discernment is an act of faith, not distrust. Choosing boundaries is choosing alignment. It's deciding that your energy will no longer be spent trying to earn validation or avoid discomfort. It's realizing that you can still love people deeply without allowing them to misuse your generosity. Kindness with boundaries creates healthier relationships, clearer purpose, and a stronger sense of self. It allows you to give from overflow rather than depletion, to serve without resentment, and to love without losing yourself in the process. Discernment is a spiritual responsibility, not a personality trait reserved for a few cautious people, but a discipline required of anyone who desires to walk in wisdom and purpose. It is the ability to perceive beyond what is presented, to sense what is aligned and what is merely attractive, what is genuine and what is convenient. Many people pray for blessings, open doors, and divine connections, yet fail to ask for discernment, even though discernment is what determines whether a door should be walked through or quietly closed. In faith, not everything that looks good is God, and not everything that feels right is safe. Discernment acts as a filter between intention and action, helping you recognize when something is spiritually beneficial and when it is emotionally manipulative. Without it, people rely solely on emotions, charisma, or surface-level goodness, assuming that familiarity equals trust. But spiritual maturity understands that alignment is proven over time, not declared in moments. God never intended his people to move blindly. Discernment is how you guard your spirit while still remaining open to love and growth. It is the inner awareness that alerts you when someone's words sound right, but their fruit tells a different story. It helps you recognize when opportunities come with hidden costs and when relationships subtly pull you away from who you are called to be. Ignoring that inner nudge is not humility, it is negligence. Many betray their own spiritual responsibility by silencing discernment in the name of kindness, loyalty, or optimism. They override warnings because they don't want to seem judgmental or unloving. But discernment is not judgment, it is wisdom in action. It doesn't condemn people, it clarifies positioning, it doesn't assume the worst, it simply refuses to ignore patterns. When discernment speaks and you choose to ignore it, you accept consequences that were never assigned to you. Discernment requires courage because it often leads to uncomfortable decisions. It may require you to step back from people who appear supportive, but consistently drain your peace. It may require you to delay opportunities others rush into. It may require you to disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. That discomfort is not punishment, it is protection. Spiritual responsibility means understanding that obedience sometimes looks like restraint, not action. This responsibility also demands patience. Discernment is sharpened in stillness, not noise. When life is loud, when opinions are many, and pressure is constant, discernment becomes harder to hear. That is why prayer, reflection, and solitude are not luxuries but necessities. Discernment thrives when the spirit is quiet enough to listen and strong enough to obey. It grows when you learn to wait for clarity instead of rushing to avoid uncertainty. To live without discernment is to surrender control of your direction to circumstances and people. To live with it is to walk intentionally, trusting that God's guidance is often subtle, but always consistent. Discernment is how you honor the gift of free will while staying aligned with divine purpose. It is the responsibility to protect your calling, your peace, and your future from unnecessary compromise, recognizing that every yes and every no carries spiritual weight. Access must be earned, not assumed, because proximity to your life, your thoughts, and your future carries weight that too many people handle carelessly. In a world that encourages oversharing and instant familiarity, it has become common to treat personal access as a default instead of a privilege. But wisdom teaches that closeness should be cultivated, not granted on arrival. When people gain access without demonstrating consistency, respect, or alignment, they often mishandle what they did not work to receive. Many people confuse friendliness with permission. A smile becomes an invitation. A kind gesture becomes a green light. Transparency becomes entitlement. Over time, individuals begin to speak into your decisions, influence your emotions, and occupy mental space they were never meant to have. When access is assumed rather than earned, boundaries erode quietly, and the cost is often paid in confusion, stress, and misplaced loyalty. Earning access requires more than shared history or emotional moments. It requires character under pressure, respect without supervision, and consistency over time. Anyone can show up when it's convenient, celebrate you when you're winning, or offer advice when it costs them nothing. True access is proven in how someone handles your vulnerability, your success, your boundaries, and your growth. If they cannot honor those, closeness becomes a liability rather than a blessing. Spiritually, access is tied to stewardship. You are responsible for what you allow near you because influence shapes direction. The people closest to you help shape your thinking, your habits, and your expectations. That is why discernment and access are inseparable. Allowing someone close without evaluation is not generosity, it is negligence. Even in faith, intimacy was selective. Trust was built, not rushed. Presence was offered, but influence was limited. When access is assumed, people feel entitled to your time, your explanations, and your emotional labor. They question your choices, demand availability, and interpret boundaries as rejection. This entitlement often reveals itself when you begin to restrict access. Those who benefited from your openness without earning it will resist your growth, not because you changed for the worse, but because you changed the rules. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Learning to require earned access reshapes how you relate to others. You stop oversharing with people who have not proven discretion. You stop seeking validation from those who lack investment. You stop allowing casual opinions to carry authoritative weight in your life. Instead, you create layers of relationship, understanding that everyone does not need to know everything, and not everyone is qualified to speak into your destiny. This shift is not about arrogance or isolation. It is about honor. You honor yourself by protecting your inner world. You honor others by setting clear expectations instead of silent resentment. You honor God by recognizing that what He placed inside you is valuable and deserves care. When access is earned, relationships become healthier, trust becomes deeper, and influence becomes more constructive. Requiring earned access also demands patience. It means resisting the urge to rush connection out of loneliness or fear. It means allowing time to reveal intentions, patterns, and character. Time exposes what words try to hide. Those meant to walk closely with you will respect the process and not pressure you to lower standards for their comfort. When you understand that access is a privilege, not a right, you begin to move differently. You listen more than you explain. You observe more than you react. You give people space to show you who they are before you give them space in your life. This approach protects your peace, preserves your focus, and ensures that those who walk beside you are there by qualification, not assumption. Faith does not require overexposure. Yet many people live as though spiritual authenticity means complete transparency with everyone they encounter. They believe that to be faithful is to be fully open, always available, and endlessly explainable. But wisdom teaches that revelation is progressive, not impulsive. Faith invites trust in God, not indiscriminate access to people. When overexposure replaces discernment, vulnerability becomes a liability rather than a pathway to growth. There is a difference between being open and being exposed. Openness is intentional and purposeful, shared in safe spaces for healing and alignment. Exposure is uncontrolled, driven by pressure to prove sincerity or gain acceptance. Many overshare not because it is healthy, but because they feel obligated to justify their journey, their choices, or their silence. Faith never demanded that you make your entire life public in order to be obedient. Even in Scripture, depth was selective. Truth was spoken, but not always to everyone. Parables were used not to confuse, but to protect meaning from those unwilling to understand. Spiritual wisdom recognizes that not every listener is equipped to handle sacred information. When you overexpose, you invite opinions from people who lack context, maturity, or spiritual insight. Those opinions can distort clarity and weaken conviction. Overexposure often stems from insecurity disguised as humility. People feel the need to explain themselves to avoid being misunderstood, judged, or abandoned. They reveal too much too soon, hoping transparency will create trust. But trust is not built through information alone. It is built through consistency and character. When faith is strong, it no longer needs constant validation from external voices. God values discretion. Silence is not secrecy, and privacy is not deception. There are seasons where obedience looks like quiet preparation rather than public declaration. Faith grows in hidden places before it is revealed in visible ones. When you rush exposure, you interfere with process. You allow premature access to things that are still forming, vulnerable to criticism and interference. Not everyone celebrating you is assigned to advise you. Not everyone listening deserves insight into your struggles. Overexposure creates emotional fatigue because you are constantly managing reactions, expectations, and opinions that were never meant to shape your direction. Faith is meant to anchor you, not scatter your focus. It calls for alignment with God's voice above all others. Learning to limit exposure strengthens spiritual authority. You become less reactive and more rooted. You stop explaining every decision and start trusting divine guidance. You recognize that obedience does not always need an audience. Some instructions are meant to be followed quietly, without applause or understanding. When faith is mature, it rests in obedience, not approval. Healthy faith understands timing. There is a time to speak and a time to be silent, a time to share and a time to guard. Discernment determines which season you are in. When you honor timing, you protect your peace and preserve your strength. You allow growth to happen without interference and healing to occur without unnecessary scrutiny. Faith that avoids overexposure is not weak, it is wise. It chooses depth over display, alignment over attention, and obedience over explanation. It understands that God's work in you does not need constant commentary to be legitimate. By limiting exposure, you create space for clarity, maturity, and sustained spiritual focus. Peace is more valuable than approval, yet many people live as though acceptance is the highest reward they can earn. They adjust their behavior, soften their convictions, and silence their instincts to remain likable, agreeable, and included. Approval feels affirming in the moment, but it is unstable and fleeting, shifting with opinions, moods, and convenience. Peace, on the other hand, is anchored internally and sustained through alignment, not applause. The pursuit of approval often begins subtly. It starts with small compromises that seem harmless, agreeing when you disagree, staying silent when something feels wrong, showing up when your spirit needs rest. Over time, these choices accumulate, and the cost becomes clear. You gain acceptance at the expense of inner calm. You earn praise while losing clarity. You become familiar to many, but connected to none, because you are never fully present when you are constantly performing for validation. Approval is addictive because it rewards conformity. It encourages you to blend in rather than stand firm. The more you rely on it, the more power you give away. Your decisions become influenced by how they will be perceived instead of whether they are aligned. You begin editing your truth to fit into rooms that were never designed for you. That internal conflict is where peace begins to erode. Peace requires courage because it often demands decisions that approval resists. Choosing peace may mean disappointing people who benefited from your compliance. It may mean stepping back from environments that thrive on chaos, drama, or constant noise. It may mean embracing solitude for a season while you regain clarity. These choices are rarely celebrated, but they are deeply stabilizing. Spiritually, peace is not passive. It is an active state of trust. It reflects confidence in divine guidance rather than human affirmation. When you prioritize peace, you acknowledge that God's approval outweighs public opinion. You no longer chase affirmation from places that cannot sustain you. You become grounded, not because life is perfect, but because your spirit is no longer divided. The absence of peace is often a signal that something is misaligned. It reveals where you are forcing connection, overextending loyalty, or tolerating what contradicts your values. Ignoring that signal for the sake of approval leads to burnout and resentment. Peace, when honored, redirects you back to yourself and your purpose. Many people fear that choosing peace will make them appear selfish or detached. In reality, it makes them honest. Peace creates space for authentic relationships, ones that do not require constant explanation or performance. It filters out connections rooted in convenience and attracts those built on mutual respect. When peace is present, you can engage without anxiety and withdraw without guilt. Approval demands consistency with others' expectations. Peace demands consistency with your own values. One requires you to adapt constantly. The other allows you to stand still. When you stop negotiating your well-being for acceptance, your life becomes simpler, quieter, and more intentional. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of appease. Valuing peace reshapes your priorities. You protect your time, your energy, and your emotional space. You listen to your inner warnings instead of dismissing them. You understand that not every opportunity is worth the disruption it brings. Peace becomes the measure, not popularity. When peace becomes non-negotiable, clarity follows. Decisions become cleaner. Relationships become healthier. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you are no longer living for interpretation. You live from alignment, grounded in the understanding that peace is not something you find in people's approval, but something you preserve by honoring truth and purpose. Not every connection is a divine assignment, even though many people treat every relationship as though it carries spiritual obligation. They remain connected out of guilt, nostalgia, or fear of appearing disloyal, assuming that longevity equals purpose. But divine alignment is not measured by time alone. Some connections are seasonal, meant to teach, refine, or redirect, not to remain permanently attached to your future. Confusing attachment with assignment leads to stagnation. You hold on to relationships that no longer sharpen you, conversations that no longer inspire growth, and environments that quietly drain your passion. What once felt meaningful becomes heavy, but instead of releasing it, you spiritualize the weight. You convince yourself that endurance is always holy, even when the connection consistently pulls you away from clarity and peace. Divine assignments bring growth, accountability, and alignment, even when they are challenging. Distractions, on the other hand, consume energy without producing fruit. They keep you busy but unfulfilled, connected but unfocused. Not every person who enters your life is meant to walk with you long term, and recognizing that is not a lack of love, it is an act of wisdom. Love does not require permanent access. Many people ignore this truth because letting go feels like failure. They fear that releasing a connection means they misunderstood God or wasted time. But purpose is not threatened by discernment. Every season has value, even the ones that end. Some relationships serve their purpose by revealing boundaries, strengthening discernment, or exposing patterns that need to be broken. Spiritual maturity understands that God's guidance evolves as you do. The people who supported you in one season may not be equipped for the next. Growth changes requirements. As you develop clarity, discipline, and direction, your circle must also shift. Holding on to incompatible connections out of sentimentality can delay obedience and dilute focus. Not every open door leads to destiny. Some doors test discernment. Just because a connection is familiar does not mean it is assigned. Familiarity can create comfort, but comfort can also become complacency. Divine assignments may challenge you, but they will not consistently compromise your values or disturb your peace. Releasing non-assigned connections requires courage and trust. It means believing that alignment matters more than appearance. It means accepting that some people are meant to celebrate you from a distance rather than walk closely beside you. This release is not rejection, it is repositioning. It creates space for relationships that support where you are going, not where you have been. Discerning assignments also means resisting emotional dependency. When identity becomes tied to relationships, separation feels threatening. But purpose must remain anchored in calling, not companionship. Divine assignments complement your growth. They do not replace your direction. They walk alongside purpose, not ahead of it. Understanding that not every connection is assigned brings relief. You stop forcing alignment where there is none. You stop explaining decisions to people who no longer share your values. You stop carrying emotional responsibility for outcomes that are not yours to manage. You allow God to order your relationships instead of clinging to them out of fear. When you honor divine alignment, relationships become lighter and more intentional. You engage without obligation and serve without resentment. You recognize when a connection has fulfilled its role and release it with gratitude rather than guilt. This awareness protects your energy, sharpens your focus, and keeps your life aligned with purpose rather than distraction. Boundaries protect purpose, not ego, yet they are often misunderstood as walls built out of pride or selfishness. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear being labeled difficult, unloving, or arrogant. They assume that spiritual humility requires constant availability and endless flexibility. But purpose cannot thrive in chaos, and without boundaries, even the strongest calling becomes vulnerable to distraction, misuse, and delay. Purpose requires focus, and focus demands limits. When boundaries are absent, energy is scattered across obligations that have little to do with assignment. Time is spent managing expectations, resolving unnecessary conflict, and responding to demands that were never aligned with direction. What suffers most is not productivity, but clarity. Without boundaries, purpose becomes diluted, pulled in multiple directions by voices that lack authority over your life. Boundaries are not reactions to people, they are commitments to direction. They define what you will and will not allow to interfere with your calling. When boundaries are set, they create structure that supports growth. Just as a river needs banks to move with strength and direction, purpose needs boundaries to flow effectively. Without them, potential spreads thin and loses momentum. Ego-driven walls are built to isolate and control, but purpose-driven boundaries are built to preserve and guide. They are not designed to keep people out, but to keep alignment in. They protect time for preparation, space for reflection, and energy for execution. When people misinterpret boundaries, it often reveals their discomfort with losing access rather than your lack of love. Many delay setting boundaries until burnout forces them to. By then, resentment has already taken root. Clear boundaries, established early, prevent silent frustration and unhealthy expectations. They allow relationships to function with honesty rather than obligation. When boundaries are respected, connection becomes healthier and more sustainable. Spiritually, boundaries reflect stewardship. You are responsible for managing what has been entrusted to you, including your gifts, energy, and attention. Allowing constant interruption or misuse of these resources is not humility, it is neglect. Purpose requires intentional protection because not every demand deserves a response, and not every invitation deserves acceptance. Boundaries also sharpen discernment. When you know your assignment, it becomes easier to recognize distractions. You stop feeling guilty for saying no to things that do not align. You stop over-explaining your decisions to those who do not share your vision. Boundaries simplify life by filtering out what is unnecessary so you can focus on what matters most. Some people resist your boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them. When access was unlimited, expectations were unchecked. Boundaries disrupt that dynamic. This resistance is often misinterpreted as conflict, but it is actually adjustment. Those aligned with your purpose will respect your limits, even if they do not fully understand them. Establishing boundaries requires confidence in calling. When identity is secure, boundaries feel natural rather than defensive. You no longer fear losing approval because you are anchored in purpose. Boundaries become an expression of clarity, not control. They communicate that your life has direction and that your energy is being invested intentionally. When boundaries protect purpose, growth becomes sustainable. You move with intention rather than urgency. You respond instead of react. You create room for excellence instead of exhaustion. Boundaries allow purpose to mature without constant interference, ensuring that what you are building is guided by alignment rather than pressure. Maturity is knowing when to say no, even when yes would be easier, more popular, or more immediately rewarding. Saying no is often misunderstood as rejection or resistance, but in truth it is a sign of self-awareness and discipline. Immaturity seeks comfort and approval, while maturity seeks alignment and long-term impact. The ability to decline without guilt reflects clarity about values, priorities, and purpose. Many people say yes out of habit rather than intention. They agree to commitments they cannot sustain, conversations they do not need, and responsibilities they did not choose. This pattern is often driven by fear of disappointing others, fear of being left out, fear of missing opportunities. Over time, constant yeses create exhaustion and resentment, revealing that the decision was never rooted in wisdom. Maturity understands that every yes carries a cost. Time spent on one thing is time taken from another, Energy given in one direction is energy unavailable elsewhere. When this reality is ignored, life becomes overcrowded with obligations that dilute focus and drain passion. Saying no becomes an act of respect for what truly matters. Learning to say no requires emotional regulation. It means tolerating discomfort without rushing to relieve it through compliance. It means allowing others to experience disappointment without assuming responsibility for their feelings. Mature individuals understand that boundaries do not require consensus. They do not need permission to protect their well-being or preserve their direction. Saying no also strengthens identity. Each intentional refusal reinforces self-trust. You begin to believe your inner guidance instead of outsourcing decisions to external pressure. This confidence grows with practice. The more you honor your limits, the clearer your direction becomes. No is not the absence of opportunity. It is the selection of the right ones. Spiritually, knowing when to say no is an expression of obedience. Not every good thing is a God thing, and not every open door is meant to be walked through. Discernment often reveals itself through restraint. When you decline what is misaligned, you create space for what is assigned. Saying no becomes a form of faith, trusting that provision does not depend on constant availability. Maturity also recognizes timing. A no in one season may become a yes in another. Declining now does not mean declining forever. It simply means honoring present capacity and current direction. When timing is ignored, even good opportunities become burdens. Saying no protects momentum by ensuring that commitments match readiness. There is freedom in selective participation. When you stop saying yes to everything, your yes gains weight and meaning. People learn that your commitment is intentional, not automatic. This shift improves relationships by setting clear expectations and reducing unspoken resentment. Clarity replaces confusion, and respect replaces pressure. Many people fear that saying no will close doors or damage relationships. In reality, maturity filters connections. Those who respect your no value you beyond convenience. Those who resent it reveal misalignment. Saying no becomes a form of truth, telling, exposing which relationships are built on mutual respect and which are built on access. When maturity guides decisions, life becomes more spacious and intentional. You move with purpose rather than obligation. You engage fully without overcommitting. You choose depth over breadth, quality over quantity. Saying no is no longer an act of avoidance, but a declaration that your life, time, and energy are being stewarded with wisdom